Ever get this like weird feeling that words, they kind of have a life of their own?
Totally. We use them every day, but then, boom, it hits you. How could these sounds we make, actually mean something in the real world?
Right. Like tree, simple word, right.
Yeah.
I know what it is, you know what it is, but how did that word get hooked to the actual thing? It's a tree.
And then it gets even more out there. You think about words for stuff that doesn't even exist.
Oh, yeah.
Like unicorns, dragons. What's happening in our brains when we're even using those words?
Our brains are weird. That's actually what we're diving into today, this whole naming and reference thing. We've got philosopher R.J. Nelson's book as our guide, same title.
It's a good one. Really interesting approach. He's all about cause and effect when it comes to this stuff.
Cause and effect, like a word gets its meaning from what? A chain of events? You're going to have to break that down for me.
Okay, picture this. Someone points at a tree, right? It says tree. Over time, you hear that word tree whenever someone's talking about that big old thing with leaves and branches.
And you start to connect them, yeah. Basic language learning, right?
But Nelson, he goes deeper, right? That initial point, the naming, it's like this chain reaction starts. Other people use the word, write about trees. Maybe they carve tree into the bark.
Okay.
All those actions, all those little historical events, they build up the word's meaning.
So the word tree, it's not just tree. It's got centuries of like human-tree interaction baggage.
Exactly. Not just some random sound. It's a word with a whole story.
Yeah.
And that story connects it to the actual tree, the real deal.
This causal theory, I'm kind of seeing it. But what about those made-up creatures we were talking about? How can unicorn mean anything if there are no unicorns?
See, now that gets really interesting. It's something Nelson really wrestles with. Because if meaning comes from these real-world events, what about the words living rent-free in our imaginations?
So is his theory broken? Is there a better answer out there?
Well, philosophy isn't always about right and wrong answers, more like exploring different ways of looking at things.
Yeah.
And that's where some other big names come in. Frege, Russell, Quine.
Hit me with the philosophy superstars. What did they have to say?
They all agreed that there's got to be more to meaning than just, pointing at things. Frege, for example, he was big on separating the sense of a word and its reference.
Sense versus reference. Those sound very important and potentially very confusing. Can you unpack those a bit?
Think of sense, like a dictionary definition, yeah. The concept it creates in your head.
So the sense of unicorn would be what? Mythical creature, single horn?
Yeah.
Even though no real unicorn to point at.
Nailed it. But reference, that's all about that real-world link. So unicorn, yeah, it's got a sense, but its reference is a little trickier.
Because it's not really pointing at anything real.
You got it.
Okay? My brain's starting to hurt a little, but like in a good way. But Russell and Quine, where do they fit into all of this? How do their ideas differ from Frege's or Nelson's?
Well, they both had their own unique takes on language in the world, kind of building on, kind of challenging what came before them.
Okay, I think I'm ready to go deeper. Let's unpack their ideas and see how they add to this whole naming and reference puzzle. So we've got these philosophers, these heavy hitters, and they're all wrestling with these ideas of sense and reference. But where's the, real world application in all this? It still feels kind of theoretical,
Well, that's kind of the cool thing about philosophy, right? It can seem super abstract, but it has this way of, sneaking into how we think about everyday stuff. Take Russell, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Precision in language. That was his jam.
Precision? Why? Were they, throwing dictionaries at each other back then?
Not exactly. He was worried about how slippery language can be. All these philosophical problems popping up, he thought, because we're using words in these, vague ways, not really being clear.
Like when I tell someone I had a productive day, but all I did was organize my desk.
Exactly. Russell, he figures if we can break language down into its little logical bits, then we can avoid all that confusion. Get to the heart of what we really mean.
Okay, I can see that. So how do we get from, regular messy language to, philosophically approved precision?
Well, Russell, he loved logic and math. He thought we could use that stuff to build the perfect language. Crystal clear, no room for ambiguity, every single word with one precise meaning.
Sign me up. That would make writing emails so much easier. But what about Quine? Was he on Team Precision too?
Quine was a different flavor, less about inventing the perfect language and more about figuring out how our current messy one actually works.
So embracing the chaos instead of trying to control it?
Kinda. He was fascinated by how we use language to understand the world, build up our knowledge. See, he didn't think meaning was packed into, individual words. It was bigger than that. It's in the whole network of our beliefs and experiences, everything connected.
Okay, so every time we use a word, it's like we're tapping into this massive web of ideas, our own personal Google search.
Love that analogy. For Quine, it wasn't a simple cause and effect like Nelson. It was this much bigger, more dynamic thing. Meaning's always in motion.
Brain's hurting again, but in a good way. Okay, so we've got Nelson, cause and effect. We've got Frege, sense and reference. And now we've got Quine's web of belief. How do we even process all this? Which one's right?
That's the thing about philosophy. There's not always a right answer. It's about exploring the different angles, you know?
Less about winning the argument, more about appreciating how complex it all is.
Exactly. Each of them, they give us a piece of the puzzle. Nelson's got that focus on shared history, how we interact. Frege makes us think about meaning versus connection to reality. And Quine, he reminds us that language isn't static. It's always evolving as we learn.
The more we get into this, the more I realize we take language for granted. It's just there, but it shapes how we think, how we experience everything.
100%. And that's why it's so important to really think about language, question those assumptions about how words work. When we do that, it unlocks a new level of understanding, not just about language, but about the whole world and how we fit into it.
Like we suddenly realize the air we breathe is made of these tiny little molecules we can't even see.
Perfect analogy. And speaking of seeing things in a new way, how do you think this whole naming and reference thing changes how we communicate? We're not all going to become philosophers overnight, right?
I mean, we can try.
Okay.
But seriously, I think the takeaway is being more mindful of the words we use, more aware that other people might understand them differently.
Exactly. Language isn't always as straightforward as we think.
And every word, even the simple ones, they've got this whole history of meaning behind them, this web of ideas we might not even realize is there.
Right.
Maybe next time I tell someone I had a productive day, I'll actually explain what I mean.
Great first step. Who knows, maybe a little clarification could spark a whole conversation about the nature of language, the limits of meaning.
Now that would be a plot twist.
Totally. But as we're thinking about the real-world implications of all this heady philosophy stuff, it's good to remember that question we started with. How much power do we have in shaping meaning? Are we just along for the ride with language, or can we actually change it?
That's a good one. I mean, on the one hand, we kind of inherit language, right? Learn it from family, friends, all that.
Totally. There's this whole shared history we're dropped into.
But then again, language changes all the time. New words, old words getting new meanings. Look at how the internet's changed how we talk.
You're not wrong. And that tells us we're not just passive. We're actively shaping how language works as we go.
So if meaning is fluid, always changing, does that mean there's no such thing as a fixed meaning? Or are we all just making it up as we go?
Now, that is a question that has kept philosophers up at night for a long, long time.
Guess we've got a lot to unpack.
We've only just scratched the surface.
So we've figured out, basically, language, this constantly shifting thing we all play a part in. But then where does that leave us? If there's no right answer, no fixed meaning, how are we even understanding each other?
$1 million question, right? And I think first things first, we got to admit, language, it's not just this neutral thing. It's not just passing information around.
Yeah.
It shows our values, what we believe, even our biases, all baked in.
So each word, it's not just describing, it's also kind of shaping the meaning for us, for whoever's listening.
Exactly. And that's a big deal. We don't even realize how much power that gives us. Words, you can mislead with them, manipulate, even make stereotypes worse.
Like that Orwell quote, right? Thought corrupts language, language corrupts thought. Round and round it goes.
Exactly. It's a vicious cycle. And that's why this whole naming and reference deep dive matters. This isn't just like philosophy class stuff. It's realizing words have power.
Right.
What we say affects the world.
This goes way beyond me trying to explain myself to my partner now. It's like language, you can use it for good or you can use it for bad.
You got to, any tool, you got to know how to use it right. With language, that means really getting the nuances, how different people, they hear different things, even if it's the same word.
Instead of a butter knife, we're using a scalpel now. Got to be careful.
Exactly. Precision. Being intentional, especially with tough topics, things that are sensitive. It's not just what you say, it's how you say it. Words have consequences.
And this is where it gets even more interesting, right? Because now it's not just me and the dictionary. It's me and you, how we use language to build our relationship.
Yeah. Think about the other person, how your words hit them, even if you don't mean any harm.
So empathy, humility, remembering we don't know everything.
100%.
This is a lot, but it's also exciting. It's like, whoa, language is this amazing thing, and we can use it to connect, to understand each other better, maybe even make things better overall.
Now you're getting it. And that takes us all the way back to that first question. How do we understand each other if meaning's always changing? Maybe it's not about finding the right words. Maybe it's about really listening to each other, being open-minded.
Giving each other space to, like, figure it out together. Language is messy, meaning is messy, but it's how we connect.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
And that's what we should all remember as we try to navigate this world, you know?
Yeah.
Everything's connected.
Totally. So next time you're searching for the perfect word, remember, it's not just about labeling something. You're joining this conversation that's been going on forever, and we're all part of it. It's how we create our reality together.
Every word you say, write, even just think, you're shaping things.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the power of your own words. Until next time, happy diving.